I'm Stephen Foskett, organizer of Tech Field Day, and we're here in Austin, Texas, with a group of international delegates brought in from around the world to learn about technology in their space. Today we have ZeroStack presenting, and if you'd like to learn more about this, you can go to techfieldday.com, and you can find a lot more videos like this at youtube.com/techfieldday.
Presentation. Again, my name is Ajay Gulati. I am one of the co-founder and CEOs at ZeroStack, and we'll be going through the rest of the presentation to see what are the new features that we have built for a self-driving private cloud. So the next thing is template-driven application deployment, because once you have built the cloud, so far we have done all the heavy lifting of have the cloud up and running, but ultimately what matters is how easily you can bring up the applications on the cloud itself. So for that, we have a Z App Store which is built in, and I think previously we had a question about what kind of apps do you support. So we have different classification between apps. So for example, we support all the common CI/CD and DevOps tools. We support all the common big data analytics apps out there, SQL, NoSQL databases, as well as most popular application and server stacks. And these are the built-in templates, but you can also take a template, modify it, and put it into your own private library. So again, I'll go through 3 different demos here. One, Jenkins, which you basically use to build your CI/CD pipeline, deployment of a Hadoop cluster, and a Cassandra cluster. So let me quickly go through Jenkins first. This is the App Store, and these are all the apps which are built in. So you can see there is a Z App Store, and then there is your library, and you can move things from Z App Store to your library, because Z App Store is more like a public app store. Your library is your private library. And here we are essentially deploying Jenkins app using the existing template in the App Store. So when you deploy the app, you would pick essentially a flavor, you would pick the base image, you would pick your networking settings, your storage volume, and other basic configuration. So now you can see it's basically making the API calls to do all the setup underneath. In some cases, it will create multiple VMs and the backend database and everything. So now the Jenkins is up and running. It gives you the username, password, and the URL where you log in to do the configuration. So now you are logging into essentially the Jenkins portal. So all it took is about 5 minutes to have Jenkins up and running, and you can also do with GitLab or Git server, and then you can connect the two together. And there is a plugin in Jenkins for OpenStack, which essentially lets Jenkins make calls into OpenStack to bring up VMs for your testing. So it's essentially, it's almost like it runs on our environment, but it calls into our environment to bring up all the slave VMs to do the testing. And that's how we are doing our own testing as well. All of our CI/CD development runs on ZeroStack Cloud. So now you can start configuring Jenkins to your liking, because now it's really your CI/CD tool. You need to configure it for your own Git server, for running your own jobs. But here I just want to show the place where you can go and configure Jenkins to call into OpenStack itself, so that it can start leveraging that infrastructure to do the testing, deployment, all of those things. And we provide the API endpoint. So if you go to the UI, it actually shows you what the API endpoints are that you can use for your own automation and scripting. So there is a tab for all the API endpoints. And again, you can control how much Jenkins can consume by being part of a project. So Jenkins is coming up as part of project. So for example, I showed on ZeroStack, we had a build project. Now you can only consume resources on that project. If it, let's say there is a bug in Jenkins and it tries to create 50 VMs trying to take over your cloud, after a certain number of VMs, it essentially will not be able to create any. Okay, so that was Jenkins. Let's look at Hadoop, which is a little bit more complicated because now it's a multi-node deployment. Again, we go to the Z App Store, and there is a Hadoop template which is built in. And you can see it's not part of your library yet, so you can click and you can import it to your library, and then you deploy everything from your own library. So you don't deploy from the public repo. And this is the YAML file. You can actually edit, and you can make changes to your liking if you need to.
Do people actually, I mean, is this a user accessible? It's obviously user accessible. I mean, is this like an online community type site, right? So can people create apps, you know, that they would be using themselves, or create, you know, so create entire tool chains like this is useful to me, push it up, and then other users out in the community can benefit from that, or is this internal to your own?
So right now it's essentially ZeroStack is providing the library. If somebody sends us saying this is something useful, or they say this is something they would like to see, we can actually put it in the library. But the library is not publicly editable. They can obviously do anything to their own library. So sure, they can upload into their own library and keep using. They don't have to tell us. They don't have to tell anybody for that.
Okay.
But for
yeah, no, I was just thinking, I mean, it'd be kind of an intriguing thing. It'd probably be a useful feature because people tend to, what are you going to call it? People tend to interact a lot more with environments like that where there's sort of the two-way push. And there's a lot of corner cases where people say, you know, developers or whatever say, I need this and exactly like that, and I got these 5 boxes and this is how it has to be. Somebody else might look at that or might have been Googling all, you know, day.
True.
Like, oh my God, that's exactly what I need.
True.
You know, and
I think right now we are trying to avoid the situation where people upload stuff and that doesn't work for somebody else, or they did something.
also a valid point.
And yeah, it becomes a little bit too noisy sometimes.
Yep.
And can I hook my library up to a source control system so that I can version these templates?
Your library.
So essentially my library is a series of heat or cloud forms templates. Those are going to change over time. I'd like to source control that.
True. So all of the stuff you can do on UI is actually available through REST-based API. So for a lot of the basic operations, we give OpenStack API, but for everything else, there is a ZeroStack REST-based API. So you can hook it up to a Git repo where whenever you update.
I'd like you to develop that for me rather than every customer developing it separately. This is one of my challenges with automation, where the answer is you can script an integration with something. If every customer or if 30% of your customers are developing it, then it's a feature request.
It's true.
Consider it as a feature request.
Okay. Sounds good.
I'm just being lazy, man.
Of course I'm being lazy. I'm an ops guy.
True. So here you can see basically we have the Hadoop cluster being spun up. So there are multiple nodes coming up. I think it's waiting for one more node to come up, which is the controller node. And we had configured essentially a 3-node cluster here. So I think it's almost ready to speed it up a little bit. And it shows you the overall status of the app deployment. So what VMs are being created, what resources are being provisioned. So as it makes those API calls, it shows you the status of all of this. And once it is done, which I think in this case it takes about 7-8 minutes, it will show you the output in terms of, okay, this is where the controller node is, this is the URL, this is the account, and now you can log into it. So it looks like it is still finishing up some of the deployment. Yeah, but the main idea is basically to make it easy to deploy applications rather than VMs, because just doing VM deployment, I think it's not very hard. There are a lot of providers who can just let you run some VMs. And actually, I want to take a quick pause here to show. So also one more thing that we do, for every operation that is happening in the system, there is an event log that shows up at the bottom. So you see exactly who is doing what operation. So when a user does operation, those also are getting logged. So this is part of our real-time events, so that later on somebody can even make an API call, get a list of all events and do audit on that. Okay, so you can see now the output is there, the overall application is deployed successfully, and now it gives you the different endpoints to log in and start configuring the app. So in this case, there is a Hortonworks dashboard URL that you log into, and now you can go and configure your Hadoop cluster. So Ambari is the management software for Hadoop. Okay, and you can also add or remove different services, because Hadoop is a big ecosystem. There are like other 50 services that you can run on top of Hadoop. So if you want to enable or disable others, you can do all that through Hadoop itself. Okay, I think the next one I just want to quickly go over is deploying a Cassandra application, which is again, I think, a very similar process. Now you are importing Cassandra and you are deploying a Cassandra cluster on ZeroStack. So the main idea is, if you look at a lot of users out there, even though they are running a Hadoop in production where they may run it on physical environments, in this case, you can actually give developers access to a virtual environment where they can bring up Hadoop, they can build some testing pipeline around it, people can have their own private Hadoop clusters, and you are sharing the underlying infrastructure to do all of that work. And that is where the value of the platform comes in. So again, very similar process. You basically pick Cassandra template, you pick how many number of nodes you want to deploy, and you give a little bit of basic information, and now it's creating the Cassandra cluster. Okay, let me move on to the next thing. I think this is, since we are running against time a little bit, I'll I'll move ahead on the Cassandra demo a little bit and then try to finish it sooner. And again, here the stack created successfully, and now you can see it gives you the output on where to log in for Cassandra, what are the different Cassandra node IPs and everything. Let's go back to the presentation. So what we essentially did is we deployed different applications using the templates, and that is the real power of the App Store, that now you can put your own templates if you want, and the IT team can essentially create some templates that they can put in, and now anybody in the company, it could be developers, it could be support team, it could be sales team, they essentially can bring up these environments very quickly. So it also helps with things like, if your team wants to do a POC and they want to quickly bring up an environment to do a POC, they can do it using App Store. If your support team wants to quickly create environments where they need to replicate a customer issue, they can quickly bring up an environment with a specific version, and now they can try to replicate the issue. And that's really what App Store provides. The next thing is essentially real-time data analysis. So what happens essentially is the ZBrain, or the ZeroStack cloud, that is collecting data from all these clusters, and putting it in a big NoSQL store. And there we are running Spark jobs for real-time analysis. We are running, storing all the events so that you can actually do auditing. You can actually call ZeroStack API and get access to a lot of this information. And for most of our UI, we have built search on top of most of our UI. So if you are looking for something, you can quickly go and search. And this is all powered by our real-time backend. So I think instead of going into many of these, this is essentially as you are browsing through the UI, you would see a lot of real-time stuff. So just to give an example, if I go back to this is our live environment. If I go back to our engineering, you would see based on different usage, there are different colors that are highlighted. So for example, in our build environment, the storage usage is at 92%. So anything above 90, the color changes. Similarly, if you are within 80 to 90, there is an orange color. So all of these things essentially are there to give you some real-time metrics and evaluation saying that this is where you are and this is how much you can consume. And if you look at any of the systems below the project or below the VM, it gives you the real-time stream of events as well. And this is, I think in this case, there are no events in the last 1 day on our build environment. But if you had just done a bunch of operations, it would show you who exactly did what. So let's move on to the next part, which I think is a lot more interesting, which is self-monitoring and self-healing control plane. This is essentially where a lot of our IP comes in, where if anything fails, we are providing all that information and healing the system. So let me go through.
So with your monitoring and alerting that you just showed,
Yeah.
are you able to create custom dashboards and roll-ups of like the entire environment or certain subsets, or is it just per the workload like you were showing?
So we have dashboards at different levels. So there is a dashboard at a project level that shows you what's going on. Then there is a dashboard at a business unit level that shows what's going on in the business unit. And then within a project, it shows you on a VM level what's the resource consumption, CPU metrics, memory metrics, IO metrics. I think if there is a custom request where somebody wants to see something specific, we can create that on a need basis.
Okay, so I couldn't go in and make, certain administrators need to be at a certain level of the every project, let's say. I just couldn't go in and do that. You can see these hosts in these 3 projects, and that's your domain. Or
so the whole thing is driven by role-based access control. So when you are creating a business unit, you can say who all have access to the business unit. Then there is an admin account and member account. So when a user logs in, the user only sees the projects that they are part of. They don't see any infrastructure. They don't see any host. So actually, let me just show that real quick. So in this case, I'm logged in as a cloud admin. So notice here it says, it's not very easy to read, but it says PES1 cloud admin. So I'm logged in as cloud admin, and I can look at the overall dashboard. I can look at infrastructure, and all of these things are available to me. But if I log into the same environment as a user, so here I'm logged in as user. So the user is Kiran here, and you can see there are only 2 projects that I see. There is no infrastructure dashboard. There is no infrastructure. It essentially shows me the projects that I'm part of, users, the App Store, and settings. So based on who logs in, you only get to see that much in your account. So all the hosts are essentially hidden from everybody else except the cloud admin who has access to that environment. Okay. So going back to the self-healing design, essentially what we have built in terms of technology, we have our own software that runs across all these nodes in a distributed manner. We have a distributed key value store where we store the configuration data. It can tolerate failures in the system. And then we are running different leaders in the system which can monitor different tasks. So each leader could be doing one or few tasks, and if any one of that fails, the leader knows how to fix that thing. And if the leader itself fails, then somebody else automatically becomes the leader. So there is a built-in self-monitoring and self-healing system as we are running this. Okay. So let's look at the demo. I'm essentially going to take a cluster and I'm going to kill one of the servers on it. And there are two things to see. One, the overall cloud API is not impacted. And second, the VM would come up on some other node. So let's go to the self-healing. So in this case, you'll see that it's a 4-node cluster. There is a VM running on zhost 3, and the HA is on that VM. So you can specify HA at a per VM level. There is a button or setting for every VM, whether it's highly available or not. And the VM has a floating IP address, which you can ping to check the health of the VM. And it's a 4-node cluster, and the VM is running on zhost 3. Okay. So now we'll essentially go to the host and we'll just kill the host, and then we'll see what happens to the rest of the services and what happens to the VM itself. So let's first make sure that the VM is up and running. Let's just ping the VM on the floating IP address. So you can see that the VM is up and running. And now we just go to the zhost and we shut it down. Okay, you can see there was an instance running there, instance 00002. So now the host is shut down. Okay, it's down now. Now the main thing to note, we don't have any separate controller cluster. Basically the services are running across these machines, which means now it took the service that was running on that host and the service moved to some other node, and that's what our control plane did. Otherwise, typically you would have a separate controller cluster and you would have your compute nodes. So now you can see here that the host is down and the VM also, it goes down a little bit because it needs to come up on the other node. We just killed the host. So if you ping the, okay, so the instance is already up on the other host. You can see now it came back on zhost 1. So it was running on zhost 3 and it came back on zhost 1, and if you ping it again, it's again back up and running.
Can you set priorities for restarts on certain virtual machines?
So right now we don't have that feature. I think that is something that I know VMware has as part of their HA. I think right now we essentially, most people set up HA on few services, not for all the VMs. So for example, if I look at our live environment, we have our Git server, our Jenkins, and 2-3 other VMs where we have set up HA. All of the rest of the stuff is more for testing where they don't really need to be HA'd.
So you're setting up HA on a per VM basis?
On a per VM, yeah. Okay, you can, if I go to the cloud health, You can see here the services, these are all the services that are running as part of the cloud, and you can notice that they are running in a distributed manner across hosts. This is just to show that when we kill a host, there is an impact on the service. It's not that there is no impact. And it's just that that's where the auto healing feature comes in, that the services are healthy again.
You may have said it already. I don't remember. Can you set affinity rules for VMs?
Yes.
So affinity, anti-affinity?
Yeah.
Okay.
So affinity, anti-affinity that we support.
So in one of the demos, you showed going from one of the Z140 series appliance to 20 minutes getting into the cloud. If, say, I want to use some Dell PowerEdge, and you said that that was a supported configuration, do I have to buy that with the ZeroStack OS already on and licensed, or if I have some that fit the model, will you sell that to me with what's already existing on your HCI in my data center? And if so, what do I have to do to get into a working environment at that point?
So if you already have a server that is part of our HCL, then essentially we would just sell the software and you can install the software. For most customers, it is done through channel or partner. They basically would take care of the install, but otherwise our team can also take care of doing the install, and they'll convert your PowerEdge into a ZeroStack cloud node.
And if I wanted to do the install myself because I have a lot of free time or whatever, would it take me 10 minutes? Would it take me a few hours? Or would it be something that I really need to get professional services for?
I would say it'll take you probably 10-15 minutes, as long, if you know how to install an image from a USB key onto a machine, I think that's what it takes. Okay. So I think for most people in this room, it should be pretty easy.
Okay.
Yeah.
And then how do you purchase or license the product?
So we essentially have two models there. One is essentially, it's the appliance where there is a appliance cost, and then there is a subscription, which is a yearly subscription. But if you are in the software only mode where you bring in servers yourself, then it's again yearly subscription on a socket basis.
Okay.